The dust hung thick in the air that September morning, coating everything in Sawbuck, Texas, with a fine layer of rust-colored grime. The sun had barely crept over the horizon, but already the heat was building, promising another scorching day that would bake the earth until it cracked like old leather. Ethan Crow squinted against the glare as he rode into town, his weathered hat pulled low over steel-gray eyes. At 32, he carried himself with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that survival meant staying alert. The war had taught him that lesson well enough, carved it into his bones alongside the scars that mapped his body like rivers on parchment. His horse, a sturdy bay named Whiskey, picked its way down the main street with the same wariness as its rider. They'd been partners for 5 years now, ever since Ethan had settled on his hardscrabble ranch 40 miles outside of town. It wasn't much, a few hundred acres of stubborn land that fought him for every blade of grass. But it was his, bought with blood money from his soldiers' pay and what little his family had left him before the fever took them all. The town was already stirring to life. Murphy's saloon had its doors propped open, the stale smell of last night's whiskey and tobacco drifting into the street. The general store's proprietor, a thin man named Josiah Briggs, was sweeping his porch with mechanical movements, sending small clouds of dust swirling into the air. A few early risers lounged against the posts outside, their eyes following Ethan with the casual interest of men with nothing better to do. Ethan touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, but didn't slow. He wasn't here for pleasantries. Old Sam Tucker had sent word about a horse auction, said there was a young stallion with Arabian blood that might be worth looking at. Ethan needed new stock if he was going to make his ranch work, and good breeding stock was hard to come by in these parts. The auction grounds were set up at the far end of town, in the dusty lot behind the blacksmith shop. Already a crowd had gathered, maybe 30 or 40 souls pressed together despite the heat. The auctioneer, a portly man named Cornelius Wade, who sweated through his shirts before noon even in winter, stood on a makeshift platform constructed from old crates and planks. Ethan dismounted and tied Whiskey to the hitching post, then made his way through the crowd. He recognized most of the faces, ranchers like himself, a few merchants, some drifters looking to make a quick profit. The smell of unwashed bodies and horse manure was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Ethan Crow," a voice called out. He turned to see Sam Tucker pushing through the crowd, his grizzled face split by a gap-toothed grin. "Thought you might not make it." "Said I would, didn't I?" Ethan replied, accepting the older man's handshake. Sam nodded toward the holding pen. "That Arabian cross is something to see. Bit wild, but good bones. Might be just what you need." Before Ethan could respond, Wade's voice boomed across the lot. Gentlemen, gather round now. We've got some fine offerings today." "Yes, sir. Fine offerings indeed." The crowd pressed closer to the platform. Ethan found a spot where he could see clearly, his trained eye already evaluating the horses being led into the ring. The Arabian cross Sam had mentioned was indeed impressive. A young stallion with a coat like burnished copper and the proud arch to his neck that spoke of desert bloodlines. But then Wade's voice took on a different quality, oily and ingratiating. "Now, before we get to the livestock, I've got a special item up for bid, something that might interest those of you looking for domestic help." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about these kinds of auctions, though he'd never witnessed one himself. The crowd's energy shifted, became hungry in a way that made his skin crawl. 2 men emerged from behind a wagon, dragging something between them. No, not something. Someone? A young woman, her wrists bound with rope, her dress torn and dusty. They hauled her up onto the platform like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. She couldn't have been more than 20, Ethan judged. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't marked by exhaustion and fear. But it was her eyes that caught him, blue as a winter sky and burning with a fury that her circumstances couldn't extinguish. "This here's Clara Bell," Wade announced, his voice carrying over the sudden murmur of the crowd. Her daddy, rest his soul, owed considerable debts before the liquor finally took him. The girl's the only asset left to settle accounts. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. The practice wasn't illegal. Debt bondage was still recognized by the courts, especially for women with no male relatives to speak for them. But that didn't make it right. Clarabelle stood straight despite the ropes, her chin lifted in defiance. When one of the men tried to turn her to display her to the crowd, she jerked away with such violence that he nearly lost his grip. Spirited little thing. Wade chuckled, and several men in the crowd laughed along. But I'm told she's a hard worker. Can cook, clean, tend animals. Knows her letters and numbers too, if that matters to any of you. I'll give $10, someone shouted from the back. 15, another voice called. Ethan found himself moving forward without conscious thought, drawn by something he couldn't name. The girl's eyes swept the crowd, and for a moment they locked with his. In that instant, he saw not just anger but a desperate plea, not for rescue, exactly, but for recognition that she was human, not livestock. $20. The bid came from Jonas Pike, a rancher with a reputation for working his help into the ground. His wife had run off 2 years back, and rumor was she'd had good reason. 25. This from Luke Morrison, whose leering expression made Ethan's stomach turn. The bidding continued, each offer making Ethan's jaw clench tighter. He'd come here for a horse. Nothing more. He had no business getting involved. His ranch could barely support him, let alone another mouth to feed. And taking on a young woman, alone on his property, it would invite talk, speculation, trouble he didn't need. But he couldn't look away from those blue eyes. $40, Pike called out, his voice aggressive now. 45, Morrison countered. Wade was practically glowing with satisfaction. 45 going once, going twice. $100. The words came from Ethan's mouth before he could stop them. The crowd turned as one to stare at him. He felt Sam Tucker's hand on his arm, heard the old man's whispered, "Boy, what are you doing?" But he kept his eyes fixed on the platform. Wade's eyebrows shot up. "Well now, $100 from Mr. Crow. That's a generous bid. Sir, very generous indeed." Pike spat tobacco juice into the dust. "That's too rich for my blood." Morrison looked like he wanted to counter, but after a long moment, he shook his head. "Let Crow have her. See how long she lasts out on that dust bowl he calls a ranch. $100 going once. Twice. Sold." Wade's gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the morning air. Ethan made his way to the platform on legs that felt disconnected from his body. What had he just done? He pulled out his money pouch, nearly all his saved cash, meant for the horse and supplies to last the winter. He counted out the bills with steady hands that belied the chaos in his mind. Clarabelle watched him approach with those fierce blue eyes. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms where rough hands had gripped her, the way she swayed slightly on her feet from exhaustion or hunger or both. "She's all yours, Mr. Crow," Wade said, pocketing the money. "You want the boys to load her in your wagon?" "I'll manage," Ethan said curtly. He pulled out his knife, and Clara flinched involuntarily. "Easy," he murmured, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "Just the rope." The bonds fell away, and she rubbed her wrists, still watching him warily. He noticed her hands work roughened but graceful, with long fingers that spoke of better times before whatever tragedy had brought her here. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. She nodded once, a sharp jerk of her head. "Then let's go." He turned and walked away, not looking back to see if she followed. The crowd parted before him, voices rising in speculation and gossip. He heard her footsteps behind him, quick and light despite her obvious fatigue. At the hitching post, he untied whiskey and swung up into the saddle, then held out his hand to her. She stared at it for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions in the calluses and scars. Finally, she She took it, allowing him to pull her up behind him. "Hold on," he said. Her arms came around his waist tentatively, and he could feel her trembling, from fear or relief or simple exhaustion. He couldn't tell. He touched his heels to Whiskey's flanks, and they moved out at a walk, leaving the auction grounds and the gawking crowd behind. They rode in silence through the town, past the saloon and the general store, past the church with its whitewashed walls already peeling in the heat. People stopped to stare, and Ethan knew that by nightfall, everyone in 3 counties would know that Ethan Crow had bought himself a girl at auction. It wasn't until they reached the edge of town that she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a strength that surprised him. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He reined Whiskey to a stop and twisted in the saddle to look at her. This close, he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the way her lower lip was split and swollen. "No," he said simply. "I'm not." She studied his face with those penetrating eyes, and he had the unsettling feeling she could see straight through to his soul. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded and relaxed fractionally against his back. "Then why?" she asked as they started moving again. It was a fair question, one he wasn't sure he could answer. Why had he spent money he couldn't spare on a girl he didn't need? Why had those blue eyes called to something deep inside him? Something he'd thought the war had killed. "Couldn't let Pike or Morrison have you," he said finally. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he could manage. She was quiet for a moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it. "Thank you." They rode on in silence, leaving Sawbuck behind as the sun climbed higher in the unforgiving sky. The road stretched out before them, 40 miles of dust and heat and uncertainty. Ethan found himself acutely aware of her presence, the weight of her against his back, the way her breathing had finally steadied, the faint scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite everything. He'd come to town for a horse. Instead, he was bringing home a young woman with fierce blue eyes and secrets he couldn't begin to guess. The rational part of his mind knew this was madness, that he'd just complicated his already difficult life in ways he couldn't predict. But another part, a part he'd thought dead and buried with his family, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd found something more valuable than any Arabian-blooded stallion. Something that might fill the empty spaces in his life with more than just the howling of prairie wind and the weight of old ghosts. As they rode toward his ranch and an uncertain future, Ethan Crow allowed himself one moment of hope before locking it away behind the walls that had kept him alive this long. Whatever came next, he'd face it the way he faced everything, head on, without flinching. Behind him, Clara Bell closed her eyes and let herself be carried forward, away from one life and toward another. The rope burns on her wrists throbbed in time with the horse's gait. But for the first time in months, she dared to believe that tomorrow might be different from yesterday. The dust rose around them as they rode, 2 damaged souls bound together by a transaction that was both ending and beginning, beneath a Texas sun that witnessed everything and judged nothing. The ranch appeared through the heat shimmer like a mirage, its weathered buildings squatting low against the endless Texas sky. Clara Bell lifted her head from where it had been resting against Ethan's back, blinking away the drowsiness that 40 miles of rhythmic hoofbeats had induced. "That's it," Ethan said, the first words either of them had spoken in hours. It wasn't much to look at. A small wooden house with a tin roof, a barn that listed slightly to the left, a few outbuildings, and a corral where 3 horses raised their heads to watch their approach. The land stretched out in all directions, dotted with mesquite and prickly pear, the grass brown and sparse from the relentless summer heat. Clara slid down from Whiskey's back before Ethan could offer help, her legs nearly buckling after the long ride. She steadied herself against the horse's flank, taking in her new surroundings with those watchful blue eyes. "I'll show you the house," Ethan said, dismounting and leading Whiskey toward the barn. "Then you can rest." "I don't need rest," she said quickly. "I can work." He stopped and looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since leaving town. Her face was pale beneath the dust, dark circles shadowing her eyes. The torn dress hung loose on her frame, suggesting meals missed and hardships endured. "When's the last time you ate?" She lifted her chin in that defiant gesture he was already beginning to recognize. "Yesterday morning." "Then you'll eat first, work later." His tone brooked no argument. "There's a pump out back where you can wash up. I'll see to the horse." The house was sparse but clean. One main room with a kitchen area, a small bedroom, and not much else. Clara stood in the doorway, uncertain. Everything about her new situation felt precarious, balanced on the edge of a knife. Ethan returned to find her still standing there. He moved past her to the kitchen, pulling out a half loaf of bread, some dried beef, and a jar of preserves. "It's not much," he said, setting the food on the rough wooden table. "Supply runs not for another week." She sat carefully, as if expecting the chair to be yanked away. When he poured water from a pitcher, her hand shook slightly as she reached for the cup. She tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger won out. He pretended not to notice how quickly the food disappeared. "There's only the one bedroom," he said while she ate. "You'll take it. I'll bed down in the barn." Her eyes flew to his. "I couldn't." "It's settled." He cut her off. "Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. There's an old lean-to off the back that could be fixed up." She nodded slowly, processing this. Everything about him confused her. The gruff kindness, the matter-of-fact way he'd upended both their lives. Men in her experience wanted something when they spent money. Yet here he was, giving up his bed without asking for anything in return. Over the next days, they developed a careful routine. Clara rose before dawn, starting coffee and biscuits before Ethan returned from checking the animals. She attacked the house with a fury that surprised them both, scrubbing floors, mending torn curtains, organizing the chaos that bachelor living had created. "You don't have to work so hard," Ethan told her one evening, finding her darning socks by lamplight. "I pay my debts," she replied without looking up. "There's no debt. I told you." "You spent $100. Now she did look at him, those blue eyes fierce. "That's more than most folks see in a year. I'll work until it's paid." He wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Pride. He recognized, maybe the only thing she had left. It was on the fourth day that he first noticed her uncanny abilities. He'd been preparing to ride out to check the fence lines when Clara appeared in the barn doorway. "Storm coming," she said. Ethan looked at the sky clear blue without a cloud in sight. "Don't see no sign of it." "It's coming." She wrapped her arms around herself, a distant look in her eyes. "By nightfall, from the northwest. The animals know." He was about to dismiss it when he noticed the horses' behavior. Restless, ears flicking, the way they got before bad weather. The cattle in the far pasture were bunching together despite the heat. Even the chickens seemed agitated. "How do you know?" he asked carefully. She shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Just do, always have. My grandmother, she had the sight too, said it was a gift." Her laugh was bitter. "Some gift." By evening, black clouds were boiling up from the northwest. Just as she'd said, the storm that followed was violent even by Texas standards. Rain coming down in sheets. Wind that threatened to tear the roof off. Lightning that turned night into day. They worked together to secure the animals, Clara moving with surprising efficiency despite the chaos. In the barn, soaked through and exhausted, they waited out the worst of it. The horses stamped nervously in their stalls while wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Clara sat on a hay bale, wringing water from her hair, while Ethan checked each animal. "Your shoulder's bleeding," she said suddenly. He looked down, surprised. A piece of flying debris had torn through his shirt, leaving a gash he hadn't even felt. "It's nothing. It needs cleaning." She was already moving, finding the medical supplies he kept in the tack room. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the wound, sure and steady. You've been hurt before, she observed, noting the other scars. War does that to a man. Which side? Does it matter now? She considered this. I suppose not. The war took from everyone. Her fingers stilled for a moment. My brother marched off in gray, never marched back. I'm sorry. Pa wasn't the same after. That's when the drinking got bad. She tied off the bandage, stepping back. There. Try not to tear it open again. The storm passed with the dawn, leaving the land washed clean and the air smelling of sage and wet earth. They emerged to survey the damage, some fence posts down, a section of roof torn from the chicken coop, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. As the days passed, Ethan found himself watching for more signs of Clara's unusual perception. She always knew when the egg-laying hens were about to stop producing, which horse was favoring a leg before it showed a limp, when the well water would run cloudy. Once, she woke him in the middle of the night, insisting they move the cattle to higher ground. He'd grumbled but complied, only to watch flash flooding sweep through the lower pasture the next morning. How? He asked her afterward. Standing on the rise, watching muddy water swirl where the herd would have been. The earth speaks, she said simply. Most folks just forgot how to listen. But it wasn't just her strange gift that unsettled his ordered existence. It was the way she hummed while she worked, filling the silence he'd grown accustomed to, the way she'd coax wildflowers to grow by the porch, bringing color to the drab landscape, the way she talked to the animals like they were old friends, and stranger still, the way they seemed to respond. One evening, he found her sitting with a half-wild barn cat that wouldn't let him within 10 feet. The creature was purring in her lap while she stroked its matted fur. That cat's meaner than a snake, he said. She's just scared. Clara replied. Been hurt too many times, but she's got kittens hidden in the loft. She's been trying to tell you for days. Sure enough, when he climbed up to check, he found 4 tiny kittens nestled in the hay. The mother cat followed Clara up the ladder, allowing her to handle the babies while keeping a wary eye on Ethan. They need names, Clara announced. They're barn cats, he protested. They don't need names. But she named them anyway. Sage, Dusty, Pepper, and Moon. Within a week, he caught himself calling them by those names, and worse, setting out scraps specifically for them. The change in the ranch was gradual but undeniable. The house felt less like a shelter and more like a home. Meals became something to look forward to rather than mere sustenance. Even the animals seemed more content, producing better, the hens laying more regularly, the milk cow giving richer cream. Yet tension hummed beneath the surface. They moved around each other carefully, maintaining proper distance. Ethan had kept his word, sleeping in the barn despite Clara's protests that the lean-to was now habitable. He knew tongues would wag in town regardless, but he could at least maintain propriety on his own land. Sometimes he'd catch her staring out at the horizon with an expression he couldn't read. Other times, he'd find her standing perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. What is it? He asked one such time. Change coming, she murmured. Then, shaking her head as if clearing it, the mare's going to foal tonight. She's not due for another week. Clara just smiled that knowing smile that made the hair on his neck stand up. The mare foaled that night, a healthy filly despite coming early. Ethan found himself less surprised than he should have been. Living with Clara was like having one foot in the practical world and one in something older, deeper. She'd predict rain by the way the spiders spun their webs, know when predators were nearby the silence of the crickets, sense sickness in the livestock before symptoms showed. Don't you find it strange? He asked her once. This knowing. She was kneading bread dough, her movements rhythmic and sure. Do you find it strange that you can track a deer by signs I can't even see, or know which plants will poison a horse just by looking? We all have our ways of knowing. Mine's just different. He had no answer for that. He only knew that his isolated ranch felt less like a fortress and more like a place where something new might grow. The woman he'd bought to save from a worse fate was saving him in ways he hadn't expected, from the crushing loneliness, from the weight of old ghosts, from the slow death of living without really being alive. As summer stretched toward autumn, the land baking under relentless sun, Ethan found himself looking forward to coming in from the fields, to find Clara there, perhaps singing softly while she worked, perhaps standing still as a statue while she listened to her invisible voices, but always bringing light to the shadows he'd grown so accustomed to. The ranch was still hardscrabble, the work still backbreaking, the future still uncertain, but now, when the wind howled across the prairie at night, it didn't sound quite so lonely. And when morning came, there was coffee already brewing and someone humming in the kitchen, and somehow that made all the difference. The storm came out of nowhere, the way desert storms do. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black as pitch. Ethan had been working the fence line when Clara appeared on horseback, riding hard. "Get to shelter!" she shouted over the rising wind. "This one's different." He didn't question her anymore. They raced back toward the ranch as the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a torrential downpour. Lightning split the sky, thunder following so close it shook the ground beneath their horses' hooves. They'd barely made it to the barn when the wind hit with the force of a freight train. The doors slammed shut behind them as they stumbled inside, soaked to the skin. The horses whinnied in terror as the building groaned and swayed. "The cattle!" Ethan shouted, remembering the herd in the eastern pasture. "They'll find their way," Clara said, her hand on his arm. "You go out there now. You won't come back." As if to emphasize her point, something crashed against the barn wall, a piece of roofing from the house. He realized, through the gaps in the walls, they could see debris flying past like deadly missiles. Then came a sound that made his blood run cold, the splintering crack of wood giving way. Part of the barn roof peeled back like paper, rain pouring through. One of the support beams groaned and started to buckle. "Move!" Ethan grabbed Clara, pulling her toward the corner where the walls were strongest. The beam crashed down where they'd been standing, sending up a cloud of hay dust that mixed with the rain. Lightning struck close, so close he could smell the ozone, illuminating Clara's face for an instant. Her eyes were wide but determined, not panicked. She helped him calm the horses, her gift with animals never more apparent than in this moment of chaos. Then Whiskey broke free from his stall, terrified by another lightning strike. The horse reared, iron-shod hooves flashing dangerously close to Clara's head. Without thinking, Ethan threw himself between them, taking the glancing blow meant for her. Pain exploded along his ribs as he went down hard. "Ethan!" Clara was beside him instantly, her hands gentle but insistent as she checked his injuries. Blood seeped through his torn shirt where Whiskey's hoof had caught him. "Just winded," he gasped, though the pain suggested otherwise. "Liar," she said, but her voice was fond. She helped him sit up against the wall, then tore strips from her petticoat to bind the wound. The storm raged on, but in their small corner there was a strange bubble of calm. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly, her fingers gentle against his ribs. "Couldn't let you get hurt," he managed. "I'm not worth—" "Don't!" His hand caught hers. "Don't ever say that." Their eyes met and held, something shifting in the space between them. The careful distance they'd maintained for months seemed suddenly foolish in the face of nature's fury. Clara's hand was warm in his, real and alive and precious. "Ethan," she whispered, and there was something in her voice he'd never heard before, not the careful gratitude of a woman indebted, but something deeper, more dangerous. The storm chose that moment to redouble its efforts. The rest of the roof gave way with a tremendous crash. Rain poured in, turning the barn into chaos. They pressed together against the wall, Clara's arms around him as much as his injury would allow. his good arm pulling her close. In that moment, soaked and scared and alive, she turned her face up to his. Lightning illuminated them both, her eyes deep as still water. His own reflection caught there like he was drowning. The distance between them disappeared. "Bury me deeper," she gasped against his mouth, her fingers tangled in his wet hair. Despite the pain in his ribs, despite the storm trying to tear their world apart, he grinned, the first real smile she'd seen from him. His fingers traced along her jaw, gentle as butterfly wings. "Careful," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion and something more primal. "I might never stop." She pulled him closer in answer, and for a moment the storm outside was nothing compared to the one between them. Years of loneliness, months of careful distance, all of it swept away like so much debris. His hands tangled in her dark hair, her body pressed against his with desperate need. They were drowning in each other, finding air only in shared breath, finding shelter only in each other's arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the storm had begun to pass. Weak sunlight filtered through the ruined roof, turning the raindrops into tiny prisms. They stared at each other, both understanding that something fundamental had changed. "Your ribs," Clara said finally, her voice unsteady. "Still broken," he admitted, but worth it. She helped him to his feet, both of them swaying slightly. The barn was a disaster. Half the roof gone, equipment scattered, hay soaked through, but the walls still stood. And more importantly, they were alive. They made their way to the house, Ethan leaning on Clara more than he wanted to admit. The main structure had survived better than the barn, though they'd lost some shingles and the porch railing was gone. Inside, Clara insisted on properly tending his injuries. She heated water, found clean bandages, worked with the same gentle efficiency she brought to everything. But now there was a new awareness between them. Every accidental touch electric, every glance loaded with meaning. 3 ribs, maybe 4, she diagnosed, wrapping the bandages tight. "You'll need to take it easy. Ranch won't run itself," he protested. "Ranch won't run at all if you puncture a lung being stubborn." She tied off the bandage, her hands lingering for a moment on his chest. "I can handle things for a few days. Clara?" No arguments. She stood, businesslike again despite the color in her cheeks. "I'll check the animals, see what damage we're dealing with. You rest." He caught her hand as she turned to go. "What happened in the barn?" "Changed things," she finished softly. "I know." She squeezed his fingers. "We'll figure it out. Ethan, but first, we survived today." Over the next days, as he healed and she worked tirelessly to hold the ranch together, they danced around this new thing between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by something tender and terrifying. They'd crossed a line in that storm-torn barn, spoke truths with touch that words couldn't capture. Clara proved as capable as she'd claimed, handling the ranch work with surprising skill. She fixed fences, rounded up scattered cattle, patched what could be patched. In the evenings, she'd return exhausted but triumphant, reporting her progress while changing his bandages. "Found 6 more head in the South Canyon," she'd say, her fingers gentle on his ribs. "That makes 42 accounted for." He'd watch her work, this woman who'd come to him in bonds but had somehow become essential. The storm had torn away more than roofs and fences. It had torn away pretense, leaving only truth between them. One evening, as she helped him to the porch to watch the sunset, he finally spoke what had been building since the storm. "I didn't buy you to save you," he said quietly. "I bought you to save me." She settled beside him, careful of his injuries. "I know. Do you—" He looked at her, really looked. "I'd been dead inside since the war, going through the motions, existing but not living. Then I saw you on that platform, fierce and unbroken despite everything. And something in me woke up. You woke something in me too," she admitted. I'd been surviving so long. I'd forgotten there was anything else. But you gave me dignity when everyone else saw property. You gave me hope when I thought it was gone forever. Clara! He turned to face her fully, ignoring the protest from his ribs. What I said in the barn, I meant it. All of it. So did I. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But Ethan, what happens now? The town already talks. If they knew... Let them talk. His hand found hers. I've faced worse than gossip. There are laws. You're not property, he said fiercely. Not to me. Not ever. Soon as I can ride, we'll go to the courthouse. I'll sign whatever papers need signing to make you free in the law's eyes. Then... He took a breath. Then you can choose to stay or go. Free and clear. And if I choose to stay, then we make a life, he said simply. Together. Proper-like. If you'll have me. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of fire. Then she smiled. That rare, full smile that transformed her face. Ethan Crow, are you proposing to me? Seems I am. He grinned, echoing his expression from the barn. Though I probably should wait till I can get on one knee without passing out. Don't you dare, she said, and kissed him. This kiss was different from the desperate passion in the barn. This was promise and partnership, the seal on something precious. When they drew apart, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Yes, she said softly. When you're healed, when the papers are signed, when I'm free to choose, my choice is you, always you. They sat together as night fell, planning a future neither had dared imagine. The ranch was battered but not broken, just like them. They'd rebuild the barn, the fences, their lives. But now they'd build together. Two souls who'd found each other in the harsh Texas landscape and chosen to burrow deep, to put down roots too strong for any storm to tear away. In the distance, coyotes howled their evening song. But here on the porch, there was peace and hope, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as disaster, that sometimes you have to be broken open before you can truly heal. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after the storm, when Ethan was finally healed enough to ride into town for supplies. Clara had wanted to come, but he'd convinced her to stay and tend the ranch. Now, sitting in Briggs's general store, he was glad for that decision. Heard you had some storm damage, Josiah Briggs said, but his usual friendliness seemed forced. Nothing we couldn't handle, Ethan replied, loading flour into his saddlebags. Briggs's eyebrows rose. Oh, right, that girl from the auction. The way he said girl made Ethan's jaw tighten. Miss Bell's been a great help with the ranch. I'm sure she has. The storekeeper's tone was carefully neutral. Though folks are talking, Ethan, Widow Morrison says she saw strange lights out at your place during the storm. Dancing around like spirits, she says. Lightning does that, Ethan said evenly. Maybe so. Briggs leaned closer, lowering his voice. But there's other talk too. Sarah Pike's boy was sick with fever, and that girl of yours happened by, touched his forehead, and the fever broke within the hour. Now Sarah's torn between gratitude and fear. Miss Bell knows herbs and healing. Nothing strange about that. Briggs shook his head. You're a good man. Ethan, just be careful. People here are set in their ways, and they don't take kindly to what they don't understand. The warning followed Ethan home like a shadow. He found Clara in the garden she'd started, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. She looked up at his approach, her smile fading as she read his expression. What happened? He told her about Briggs' warning. She listened in silence, her hands still in the dirt as if drawing strength from it. I should leave, she said finally. No. Ethan, no. He knelt beside her, not caring about the dirt. We've been through this. You're not running because of idle gossip. It's not idle. She met his eyes, her own troubled. "I did help the Pike boy. I couldn't just walk by when I felt his fever burning, and during the storm." She hesitated. "I called on the old ways to protect the house. If someone saw—" "Then they saw a woman protecting her home," he said firmly. "Nothing wrong with that." But the whispers grew louder over the following days. When Clara went to town to trade eggs, conversation stopped as she passed. Women pulled their children close. Men watched her with suspicious eyes. It came to a head on a sweltering Sunday afternoon. Ethan was repairing the barn roof when he heard horses approaching. Too many horses for a social call. He climbed down to find a group of 15 or 20 townspeople gathered in his yard. Sheriff Rollins at their head. "Afternoon, Ethan," Rollins said. His hand rested casual-like on his pistol, but his eyes were hard. "Sheriff." Ethan noted the faces in the crowd. Jonas Pike, Luke Morrison, Widow Morrison, others he'd known for years. "Something I can help you folks with? We need to talk about that girl." Rollins said. "Miss Bell," Ethan corrected. "And anything you need to say can be said to both of us." Clara emerged from the house then, as he'd known she would. She'd changed into her best dress, the one he'd bought her in town, and her head was high despite the hostility radiating from the crowd. "Witch," someone muttered. "That's enough." Ethan stepped forward, but Clara's hand on his arm stopped him. "What is it you want?" she asked calmly. Rollins cleared his throat. "There's been talk, strange happenings, unnatural things. Folks are concerned." "About what specifically?" Her voice was steady as stone. "You know things before they happen." Widow Morrison accused, "You put hands on my nephew and worked some kind of magic." "I felt his fever and suggested willow bark tea." Clara interrupted. "Is healing a crime now?" "Healing's one thing," Jonas Pike spoke up. "But what about the lights during the storm? What about knowing when rain's coming out of a clear sky? What about talking to animals like they understand you?" "Because they do understand." Clara said simply, "All creatures understand kindness. Mr. Pike, perhaps if you showed some to your own stock, you'd know that." Pike's face flushed red. "You calling me a poor rancher?" "I'm calling you a man who beats his horses and wonders why they won't work." Clara shot back. "Ask yourself why your mare came to me with whip marks on her flanks." The crowd stirred uneasily. Pike's temper was well known, but having it called out so plainly was another matter. "That's not the point," Sheriff Rollins interjected. "Point is, folks are uncomfortable. This is a God-fearing town, and I fear God plenty." Clara said, "I also respect his creation enough to listen when it speaks. If that makes me a witch, then what does it make all of you who are deaf to everything but your own righteousness?" "Blasphemy," someone hissed. "Truth," Clara countered. "I've harmed no one, helped where I could. If that threatens you, perhaps you should look to your own souls." "Enough of this." Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Clara and the crowd. "You all know me. Known me for years. I fought for Texas, bled for it. My word's always been good, and I'm telling you now, Miss Bell is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me." "That's the problem, Ethan," Sheriff Rollins said. "You're a good man, but this woman's got some kind of hold on you. It ain't natural." "What's not natural?" Ethan's voice turned dangerous. "Is a mob showing up at a man's home making accusations without proof. What's not natural is grown folks acting like scared children because a woman knows how to read the weather and heal the sick." "She's got you hexed," Luke Morrison called out. "Can't you see it?" "Only thing I see is a bunch of cowards ganging up on one woman," Ethan replied. "Now get off my land, all of you." "Or what?" Rollins challenged. "You'll take on all of us?" "If I have to." Ethan's hand moved to his own pistol. "But I'm betting not all of you are willing to bleed for your fear. Some of you remember who you are, who I am, what we've been through together." There was a tense silence. Then Sam Tucker pushed through the crowd. The old man had been quiet until now, but he moved to stand beside Ethan. "Boy's right," Sam said. "This ain't who we are. I've seen Miss Clara's kindness firsthand. She saved my milk cow when everyone said it was done for. If that's witchcraft, then I'll take it over letting an animal suffer." "Sam," Rollins warned. "No, Floyd. I'm done with this foolishness." Sam faced the crowd. "Half of you have benefited from this young woman's help. Sarah Pike. Your boy would have died without her. Margaret Turner, who told you about the mint that eased your daughter's stomach. And you, Jonas, who warned you to move your herd before the flash flood." The crowd shifted uneasily. Clara's quiet acts of kindness had touched more lives than fear wanted to admit. "That don't mean she ain't dangerous," Widow Morrison insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Only thing dangerous here is ignorance," Clara said softly. "I've done nothing but try to help. If you want me gone, I'll go, but not because you drove me out in fear. If I leave, it will be my choice, made in daylight, not forced by torches in the dark." Something in her dignity, her calm acceptance, seemed to shame them. The mob energy dissipated like morning mist. People looked at their feet, at the sky, anywhere but at the young woman they'd come to condemn. "This ain't over," Rollins said finally. "We'll be watching." "Watch all you like," Ethan replied. "Just do it from a distance. Anyone sets foot on my land uninvited again, I'll consider it trespassing and act accordingly." The crowd dispersed slowly, people mounting horses and climbing into wagons. Some looked ashamed, others defiant, but they all left. Only Sam Tucker lingered. "You've made enemies today," the old man said quietly. "Already had enemies," Ethan replied. "Just didn't know their faces." Sam nodded, then turned to Clara. "You be careful. Miss Fear makes people do terrible things." After he left, Ethan and Clara stood in the empty yard. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. The confrontation had taken something from both of them. Innocence, perhaps, or the hope that they could live peacefully. "They'll be back," Clara said. "Maybe." He pulled her close, feeling the tremor in her body that she'd hidden from the crowd. "But we'll be ready." "I won't let them hurt you," she whispered fiercely. "Not for protecting me. And I won't let them drive you away." He tilted her chin up. "We stand together or not at all." She kissed him then, there in the open where anyone could see. It was defiance and promise and something deeper, a claiming of their right to choose each other despite the world's objections. When they broke apart, the first stars were visible in the darkening sky. Inside the house, dinner waited. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. But tonight, they had each other and the stubborn courage that had brought them this far. "Come on," Ethan said, taking her hand. "Let's eat, then we plan." Plan for what? For whatever comes next. His grip tightened. They want to fight, they'll get one. But on our terms, not theirs. They went inside together, leaving the empty yard to the gathering darkness. In the distance, a coyote howled. Lonely, defiant, wild. It was answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their song. Clara paused at the door, listening. "What do they say?" Ethan asked. She smiled, sad but determined. "That the pack is stronger than the lone wolf, that some things are worth fighting for." He squeezed her hand. "Then we fight. Together," she agreed, and closed the door against the night. The attack came on a moonless night, when the darkness was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Clara woke first, that peculiar gift of hers screaming danger before the first footfall reached the porch. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. "They're here." He was instantly alert, years of war having trained him to go from sleep to readiness in a heartbeat. Through the window, he could see torches moving through the darkness. 5, maybe 6 men approaching the house. "Get to the root cellar," he ordered, reaching for his rifle. "No," her voice was steel. "We stand together, remember." Before he could argue, the front door exploded inward. Sheriff Rollins stood in the doorway, backed by Jonas Pike and 4 other men, their faces twisted with righteous fury. "Should have left when you had the chance. Witch," Rollins snarled. "This is my home," Clara said, stepping forward despite Ethan's attempt to shield her. "You have no right." "We got every right to protect our town from evil," Pike interrupted. "Reverend says you're a danger to good Christian folk." "Since when does the Reverend preach breaking into homes?" Ethan demanded, his rifle trained on Rollins. "This isn't justice. It's mob rule." "Sometimes the law ain't enough." Rollins said, "Sometimes good people have to take matters into their own hands." The first shot came from outside, Luke Morrison, firing through the window. Ethan shoved Clara behind the overturned table as glass shattered around them. The room erupted in chaos, gunfire splitting the night. Ethan returned fire, his shots careful and measured. One of Pike's men cried out, clutching his shoulder, but they were outnumbered, and the attackers had the advantage of preparation. "The barn!" someone shouted outside. "Burn them out!" Through the broken window, Clara saw flames beginning to lick at the barn walls. The horses were screaming, trapped inside. Without thinking, she bolted for the back door. "Clara, no!" Ethan tried to grab her, but she was already gone. She ran into the night, her white nightgown making her a target against the darkness. A shot whistled past her ear, but she didn't slow. The horse's terror called to her louder than any human voice. She reached the barn as the flames were taking hold, throwing open the doors and plunging inside despite the smoke. Whiskey was rearing in his stall, eyes rolling white with fear. She grabbed his halter, speaking in the old language her grandmother had taught her, the words that calmed wild things. One by one, she freed them. Whiskey, the mare, the new foal. They thundered out into the night, away from the flames and the men who'd brought them. She was following the last one out when a figure blocked her path. "Got you now, witch," Pike growled, raising his pistol. But he'd forgotten about the animals. The mare, recognizing the man who'd beaten her, struck out with her hooves. Pike went down screaming, his gun flying from his hand. Clara didn't wait to see if he got up. Back at the house, Ethan was fighting a losing battle. They'd shot out most of the windows, and Rollins was calling for them to surrender. "Give us the girl, Ethan. You don't have to die for her." "Go to hell, Floyd!" Clara slipped back through the chaos, but Morrison saw her. "There she is." She dove behind the water trough as bullets churned the dirt where she'd been. Ethan tried to cover her, but there were too many angles, too many guns. Then Rollins made his mistake. Frustrated by the standoff, he grabbed a torch and headed for the house. "If you won't come out, we'll burn you out." As he approached the porch, Clara saw her chance. She'd been gathering her courage, reaching for the power her grandmother had warned her about, the deep magic that came with a cost. Now, with Ethan's life at stake, she didn't hesitate. She stood, raising her hands to the star-filled sky, and spoke words in a language older than memory. The wind, which had been still all night, suddenly roared to life. It came from all directions at once, impossible and furious, carrying the scent of rain and lightning. The torches guttered and died. Men cried out in fear as dust devils sprang up around them, blinding and disorienting. Rollins's torch was ripped from his hand and flung into the darkness. "Witchcraft," someone screamed. But Clara wasn't finished. Thunder rumbled overhead, though no clouds marked the sky. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing down on the attackers like a physical weight. One by one, they fell to their knees, gasping. "Leave," Clara commanded, and her voice carried despite the wind, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Leave and never return. This land is protected. These people are protected. Harm them again, and face worse than wind." The men scrambled for their horses, Pike limping and clutching his ribs where the mare had struck him. Only Rollins tried to stand his ground, but when Clara fixed her gaze on him, he too broke and ran. As suddenly as it had come, the wind died. Clara swayed on her feet, the effort having drained her. Ethan caught her before she could fall, pulling her against him. "What did you do?" he whispered, awed and a little afraid. "What I had to," she murmured against his chest. "Grandmother always said the power would come when love demanded it. I couldn't let them hurt you." He held her tighter. "They'll say this proves you're a witch. Let them say it." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce despite her exhaustion. "I'm done hiding what I am, done apologizing for gifts I was born with." They spent the rest of the night keeping watch, but the attackers didn't return. When dawn broke, it revealed the damage. The barn half burned, the house riddled with bullet holes, the yard torn up by horses and wind. But they were alive. Sam Tucker arrived around noon, bringing half a dozen others, good people who'd been shamed by the night's violence. They came with lumber and nails, ready to help rebuild. Heard there was quite a commotion. Sam said carefully, "Rollins is telling tales about demons and such." "Rollins is a coward who attacks folks in the night," Ethan replied. "Whatever he saw, he brought on himself." "Fair enough." Sam studied Clara, who was tending Ethan's cuts from flying glass. "Miss, I don't pretend to understand what you are or what you can do, but I know you've never used it for harm until they forced your hand. That's good enough for me." One by one, the others nodded agreement. Margaret Turner, whose daughter Clara had helped. Ben Cooper, whose cattle Clara had doctored. Even Sarah Pike, defying her husband to stand with them. "We're not all fools," Sarah said quietly. "Some of us remember what neighborly means." They worked through the day, raising new walls where fire had taken the old. Clara moved among them, bringing water, tending wounds, her presence both foreign and familiar. Some still looked at her with unease, but respect had replaced fear. As the sun set on their rebuilt barn, Ethan found Clara standing apart, watching the horizon. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, feeling the tension in her body. "They'll come again," she said. "Maybe, but not tonight, and not alone. We've got friends now, real ones." She leaned back against him. "I frightened you last night when I called the wind." "You saved us," he corrected. "That's all that matters." "The power," she hesitated. "It's stronger than I knew. Grandmother tried to teach me to control it, but I was young, afraid. Now I wonder if I should have listened better." "You did what was needed, no more, no less." He turned her to face him. "I've seen men do terrible things with ordinary power guns, money, fear. What you have isn't evil, Clara. It's just different. Different has always been dangerous in places like this. Then we make our own place." He cupped her face in his weathered hands. "Here, on this land, where different is welcome, where gifts are celebrated, not feared." She smiled then. "The first real smile since the attack. You make it sound simple." "Simple? No. Possible. Yes." He kissed her forehead. "We've survived drought, storms, and now this. We can survive narrow minds and fearful hearts." "Together," she said, echoing their promise. "Always together." That night, they slept in their patched house with loaded guns nearby and friends keeping watch in shifts. The war for their right to exist in this place wasn't over, might never be truly over, but they'd won this battle, and in winning, had begun to change hearts. Clara's power was no longer a secret to hide, but a truth to navigate. Some would always fear her, but others had seen her use it to protect, not harm, and that made all the difference. As Ethan held her in the darkness, listening to her breathe, he thought about the twists that had brought them here, A bitter auction on a dusty morning. $100 spent on impulse. A young woman with gifts that defied explanation. And somehow, from all that strangeness and sorrow, they'd built something worth defending. The coyotes sang in the distance, their voices wild and free. Clara murmured in her sleep, her hand finding his even in dreams. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it as they'd faced tonight, together, unafraid, and absolutely certain that some things were worth any price. The land knew them now, had seen them tested and proven, and perhaps that was Clara's greatest gift, not the winds she could call or the futures she could glimpse, but the way she made everywhere she stood feel like home. The change came slowly, like spring after a hard winter. In the weeks following the attack, something fundamental shifted in how Sawbuck viewed Clara Bell. Fear began to transform into cautious curiosity, then grudging respect. It started with small things. Mary Cooper brought her colicky baby to the ranch, desperate after 3 sleepless nights. Clara held the infant, humming an old melody while mixing herbs into warm milk. Within an hour, the baby slept peacefully. "How?" Mary asked, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Fennel and chamomile, mostly," Clara said gently, "and knowing how to hold her so her belly doesn't hurt. Your grandmother probably knew the same remedies." Word spread. Soon, others came seeking help, not in secret anymore, but openly. A farmer with blighted crops, a young bride who couldn't conceive, children with nightmares that wouldn't cease. Clara helped them all, never asking for payment, never turning anyone away. Ethan watched this transformation with quiet pride. His Clara, for she was his now in every way that mattered, was becoming what she was meant to be. Not hidden, not ashamed, but a healer, a bridge between the old wisdom and the new world. The schoolmarm, Miss Elizabeth Harper, was among the first respectable folk to openly befriend Clara, a young woman from back east with progressive ideas. She saw Clara's gifts as something to study, not fear. "You understand patterns," Elizabeth said one afternoon, watching Clara teach a group of children to read animal tracks. "Weather, illness, behavior, you see connections others miss." "My grandmother called it listening with more than ears," Clara replied. "Anyone can learn, if they're willing." "Then teach us," Elizabeth said simply. So began Clara's informal classes. Every Tuesday afternoon, women and children would gather at the ranch. Clara taught them to read the sky for weather, to know which plants healed and which harmed, to understand the language of birds that warned of predators. The children especially took to these lessons. They'd follow Clara around the ranch, a chattering flock of small disciples eager to learn her secrets. "Miss Clara, why do the horses like you so much?" little Ruth Turner asked. "Because I like them," Clara answered, showing Ruth how to approach slowly, hand extended. "Fear makes animals nervous, but if you're calm and kind, they know you mean no harm." Even some of the men began to come around, though they'd never admit it outright. When drought threatened, they'd casually ask Ethan if Clara had mentioned anything about rain. When their animals sickened, they'd happen to ride by when Clara was tending her herbs. Sheriff Rollins remained hostile, but his authority had diminished. Too many people had seen him lead a night raid on innocent folk. The town council quietly suggested he might want to seek employment elsewhere. He left Sawbuck 2 months after the attack, bitter and defeated. The new sheriff, Thomas Bradley, was a different sort of man. A former teacher turned lawman. He believed in justice tempered with wisdom. His first official visit to the ranch was to apologize for his predecessor's actions. "I've heard what you do for folks," he told Clara. "Seems to me, helping people is what we're all supposed to do. Long as you're not breaking any actual laws, you'll have no trouble from me." Ethan's ribs had long since healed, and with them, something in his spirit had mended too. The lonely man who'd ridden to a horse auction months ago was gone, replaced by someone who smiled easily and planned for futures beyond mere survival. They'd made the trip to the courthouse as promised, signing papers that legally freed Clara from any bonds of servitude. The clerk, old Mr. Weatherby, had peered over his spectacles at them. "You sure about this?" "Crow, that's a lot of money to just write off." "Best investment I ever made," Ethan replied, watching Clara sign her name with a flourish. "And what are your plans now, Miss Bell?" Weatherby asked. "You're free to go anywhere." Clara looked at Ethan, her eyes shining. "I plan to go home, Mr. Weatherby, to my ranch, my horses, and the man I'm going to marry." They'd wed a week later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Sam Tucker stood as Ethan's witness, Elizabeth Harper as Clara's. The Reverend had initially refused to perform the service, but when half his congregation threatened to find a new church, he'd reconsidered. Now, watching Clara work with the children, Ethan felt a contentment he'd never known was possible. The ranch prospered under their joint care. The horses Clara trained were sought after 3 counties over. Her remedies were traded for goods and services, building a network of mutual support that no amount of money could buy. Mr. Ethan, young Tom Bradley, the sheriff's son, came running. "Miss Clara says the mare's going to foal tonight. Can I watch?" "If your PA says it's acceptable and you do exactly as Miss Clara tells you," Ethan agreed. The boy whooped and ran off to find his father. Clara approached, wiping her hands on her apron, a streak of dirt across her cheek that Ethan found oddly endearing. "You've got half the town's children thinking they want to be horse trainers," he teased. "Better than thinking they want to be gunfighters," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Tom's got gentle hands. He'll be good with animals, like someone else I know." He kissed the top of her head. "You've changed this place, Clara. Changed it for the better." "We've changed it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you standing beside me. Your courage gave me strength." They stood together, watching the sun lower toward the horizon. In the distance, they could see riders approaching, the Turner family, coming for evening lessons. Margaret Turner had become one of Clara's most dedicated students, learning herbal remedies to help her neighbors. "Ethan," Clara said suddenly, her voice taking on that distant quality he'd learned to recognize. "There's something else, something I've been meaning to tell you." He pulled back to look at her, noting the mix of joy and uncertainty in her eyes. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "By spring, we'll need to expand that schoolroom. We're going to have a student who lives here full-time." For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then joy burst through him like sunrise. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed. "A baby, you're sure?" "Very sure. The signs have been clear for weeks." She cupped his face as he set her down. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" He kissed her deeply. "Clara, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. First you, then a real home, then purpose. And now this, I'm so far beyond happy I don't have words for it." "I do," she said softly. "Blessed. We're blessed, Ethan." The Turner family arrived, and soon the ranch filled with voices and laughter. Clara moved among them, teaching, healing, being exactly who she was meant to be, no longer hidden, no longer afraid, but shining like a light in the desert. That night, after everyone had gone home and the mare had safely delivered a beautiful filly, Ethan and Clara sat on their porch. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the coyotes sang their eternal songs. "Do you think our child will have your gift?" Ethan asked. Clara's hand rested on her belly, protective already. "Perhaps, or perhaps they'll have your gift instead, the courage to protect what matters, the strength to stand against wrong. Or both," he suggested. "Or both," she agreed. "Either way, they'll grow up knowing they're loved, accepted for exactly who they are. No one will make them ashamed of their gifts, whatever they might be." "In this place we've built," Ethan said, Different isn't dangerous. It's welcome. Yes, Clara murmured. This place we've built. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their land. The barn was full of healthy animals. The garden grew green despite the dry climate. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now regularly rang with laughter. And at the heart of it all, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd fought for their right to love and live freely. They'd faced fear with courage, hatred with persistence, ignorance with patient teaching, and they'd won, not by defeating their enemies, but by transforming them into neighbors, students, friends. The land that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving had become fertile ground for new beginnings, seeds of change, planted in unlikely soil, growing into something beautiful and strong. As they headed inside, Clara paused at the door. "Listen," she said. Ethan stopped, straining to hear whatever had caught her attention. "What is it?" "The land," she said, smiling. "It's singing. It's happy." He pulled her close, and for just a moment, he thought he could hear it too, a deep contentment in the whisper of wind through grass, in the settling of the house around them, in the very ground beneath their feet. They were home. They were family. They were exactly where they belonged. And in the spring, when wildflowers bloomed impossibly bright across the desert and their child's first cries echoed across the ranch, even the skeptics had to admit that some kinds of magic were simply love by another name. 20 years had passed since that dusty auction morning, and the ranch had transformed into something neither Ethan nor Clara could have imagined. Where once stood a lonely homestead now sprawled a thriving settlement, not quite a town, but more than a ranch. They called it Haven Creek, after the stream Clara had coaxed from the ground during the drought of '81. Ethan sat beneath the old cottonwood tree they'd planted their first year together, his hair now more silver than brown, watching the afternoon activity. Children ran between the buildings, the expanded house, the schoolroom, the healing center Clara had established. Their own children were among them James, 18 and already taller than his father, Sarah, 15 with her mother's gift for understanding, and the twins, Mary and Martha, 12 years old and wilder than mustangs. Clara emerged from the healing center, accompanied by a young woman Ethan recognized as Rebecca Morrison, Luke Morrison's daughter. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd once bid to buy Clara at auction now sent his daughter to learn from her. "Remember," Clara was saying, "willow bark for fever, but never for children under 2, and always ask if they've had it before. Some folks get sick from it." Rebecca nodded earnestly, writing in her journal. She'd been Clara's apprentice for 2 years now, one of several young people who came to learn the healing arts. Some had the gift of knowing, like Clara. Others simply had kind hearts and steady hands. Clara welcomed them all. Sarah came running, her dark braids flying. "Tommy Bradley's here with news from town." Tom Bradley, now deputy sheriff like his father before him, rode up looking pleased with himself. He'd grown into a solid young man, one of many children who'd learned gentleness at Clara's knee and carried those lessons into adulthood. "Mrs. Crow. Mr. Crow." He touched his hat. "Thought you'd want to know the territorial governors accepted the town council's recommendation. Haven Creek is officially recognized as a settlement. You can establish your own school, your own peacekeeping, everything legal and proper." Clara's eyes shone. "After all these years." "It's what you've built here," Tom said. "Governor said he'd never seen a formal petition with so many signatures. Even got letters from folks in Austin talking about the healing work done here." Ethan rose, his joints protesting slightly. "You'll stay for supper." Tom, "Wouldn't miss it, sir." As evening approached, the extended community gathered as they did most nights. Long tables were set beneath the trees, laden with food from many kitchens. It had started small, just the families who'd stood by them during the troubles. Now it encompassed dozens of households. all connected by threads of mutual aid and affection. Ethan found his usual spot at the head table, Clara beside him, their children scattered among friends. The distinction between blood kin and chosen family long since blurred. He watched James help serve the elderly widow Turner, saw Sarah mediating a dispute between younger children with natural authority. "You're thinking deep thoughts," Clara observed, her hand finding his beneath the table. Remembering, he admitted, that scared girl on the auction platform, that lonely man who thought he needed nothing but a horse. "They found each other," she said softly. "Found their way home." After supper, as was tradition, came the teaching time. Tonight it was young Peter Cooper's turn to share what he'd learned. The boy stood nervously before the gathered community, clearing his throat. "Miss Clara taught me to read the bees," he began. "When they fly low, rain's coming. When they're angry without cause, storms brew. But when they dance in spirals—" He smiled, gaining confidence. "That means the flowers will bloom heavy, and the harvest will be good." Applause greeted his words. Other children eagerly shared their own observations, how ants behaved before earthquakes, what the sunset colors meant for tomorrow's weather, which bird calls warned of predators. Knowledge that had once been feared as witchcraft was now treasured as wisdom. Later, as families began departing for their homes, Ethan and Clara walked to their favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the entire settlement. Lanterns twinkled in windows like earthbound stars. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted on the evening breeze. "Did you see this coming?" Ethan asked. "That day I brought you home. Could you see what we'd build?" Clara considered. "I saw possibilities, paths that might be taken. But this," she gestured at the thriving community, "this exceeded even my grandmother's visions. We didn't just make a home. Ethan, we made a place where others could be home too. The children will carry it forward." Ethan said, "James wants to expand the horse breeding program. Sarah's already a better healer than half the doctors in Texas. And the twins—" He chuckled. "Lord knows what those two will accomplish when they settle down enough to focus." "Each generation builds on the last," Clara agreed. "That's how it should be." They stood in comfortable silence. Two people who'd weathered storms, both natural and human-made. The scars remained. Ethan's ribs still ached before rain, and Clara sometimes woke from dreams of mobs and torches. But they'd transformed their pain into purpose, their fear into fuel for change. "I have something to show you," Clara said suddenly, producing a worn piece of wood from her pocket. On it, in her careful script, were the words, "Today, the earth will be gentle." Ethan smiled, recognizing the quote from their early days together. "You kept it." "Of course. It was the first time I dared believe gentleness was possible." She leaned against him. "And you know what I was right. Not every day, but enough days, more than enough." As they walked back to the house, their children came running. James carried little Martha on his shoulders while Mary raced alongside, and Sarah tried to maintain teenage dignity while clearly wanting to join the fun. "Ma, Pa," Mary called out. "Sarah says she heard the earth singing again, says something good's coming." Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. Their daughter's gift was stronger than Clara's had ever been, though she was still learning to interpret what she sensed. "What do you hear, little bird?" Clara asked. Sarah closed her eyes, that look of deep concentration crossing her features. "New voices, many of them, people who've been traveling far, looking for—" She opened her eyes, surprised. "Looking for us, for Haven Creek. They've heard about this place where different is welcomed." "Then we'd best prepare to welcome them," Ethan said simply. As they entered their home, expanded now, with rooms for each child and spaces for gathering, Clara paused at the mantel. There, among family photographs and treasured objects, sat the bill of sale from that long-ago auction. She'd insisted on keeping it, a reminder of where they'd started. From property to partner, she murmured, touching the faded paper. From transaction to transformation. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to the familiar sounds of home, Ethan pulled Clara close. Her hair was touched with silver now. Lines mapped the joys and sorrows of 20 years around her eyes. But to him, she was more beautiful than ever. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes, for staying, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." She turned in his arms, tracing the weathered lines of his face. "Ethan Crow, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Then you gave me the freedom to save myself? How could I do anything but love you? Even when it was hard, when they came with torches and guns. Especially then, that's when love matters most, when it's tested." Outside, a coyote howled, answered by others across the desert. But the sound no longer seemed lonely. It was simply another voice in the great conversation between earth and sky, between wild and settled, between past and future. "Clara," Ethan said into the darkness. "Yes, I hear it now. The earth singing. You taught me to listen." She smiled against his shoulder. "And what does it say?" He was quiet for a long moment, feeling the pulse of life all around them, their children sleeping safe in their beds, their community resting after another day of shared labor and joy, the land itself breathing slow and deep. "It says we're home," he answered. "It says we're loved. It says the story continues." Clara lifted her head and kissed him, slow and sweet. The kiss of two people who'd chosen each other again and again through every challenge and change. "Yes," she whispered. "The story continues. In our children, in our community, in every heart we've helped heal and every mind we've helped open. We wrote a love story, Ethan, but not just for us, for everyone who needs to know that different doesn't mean dangerous, that power can heal instead of harm, that love is stronger than fear." They settled back into sleep, two souls entwined, while around them Haven Creek dreamed its own dreams of tomorrow, and somewhere in those dreams, new chapters were already beginning, stories of the next generation, of challenges faced and overcome, of love finding a way against all odds. The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. And in that whisper, if you knew how to listen, you could hear the echo of a young woman's gasped words and a lonely man's promise, transformed now into something larger, a legacy of acceptance, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to the small miracles of human connection, and beneath them, a community slept peaceful and whole. Proof that sometimes the most powerful magic is simply two people deciding to build something beautiful together, one day at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope this tale of love, courage, and acceptance has touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Please leave a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with fellow story lovers across the globe. If you enjoyed this journey with Ethan and Clara, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these tales of the American frontier. Until next time, may you find your own Haven Creek, wherever you are.